Hey everybody, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell. Welcome back to the next Angry White Dude Rants. And today, I'm a little grumpy because this chair sucks. We're in the middle of a move, and Chris left with the movies yesterday, so my office chair is gone, and all we're left with is these chairs from the apartment when we moved in. And we're down to our last few days here, so I'm doing what I have to do to make videos for y'all. So the chair is going to make me extra cranky this morning, and I want to talk about CGI versus practical effects and why I am sick to death of CGI being overused. Immediately took me out of the trailer for Rings of Power. By the way, if you've watched my Rings of Power rant videos, you know that I have a lot of things to bitch about when it comes to the Rings of Power. But one of the things I reacted to when I saw the trailer was just how bad, in my mind, the CGI was. More importantly, it's not necessarily that it's bad, but it's because it's so overused, it's immediately evident that everything is being done on screen, which immediately takes me out. I'm not immersed. It looks like shit. We're going to be talking about that today. If this is your first time here and you never heard one of my rant videos, cool, welcome aboard. If you like the video, by the time you get to the end of it, smash that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get more videos like this delivered straight to you. Of course, I do a lot of other stuff here on YouTube, so don't forget to check all that stuff out. Playlists abound. There's also a Discord and a Patreon if you want to go above and beyond, which you do because you're cool and you want to support the channel. So there's also memberships too if you want to join the channel that way for when I'm doing live streams. I diverse. I digress, not diverse. I digress. Let's go into today's topic. It's early. I need more coffee. So we're gonna go through some of these articles here this morning. The big thing that I want to take away is right after I watched the trailer for Rings of Power, I immediately was just like sitting here, shaking my head, going, "Why did they use so much CGI when they have this massive budget and they could build amazing sets and all this other stuff? And instead, they're doing all this CGI." Oh, and you know what? There's an article I don't have up, which I remember right now, which I hopefully will remember to talk about. That led me to a video with Frank Oz, who did Yoda, and he was the puppeteer behind Yoda as well as the voice. And he was talking about how when CGI is done right, it just enhances a film, but when it's done wrong, it takes you out. And he used the example of basically anytime you can film on a real location or on a real set or use miniatures, miniature models, you're going to get a sense of realness and a sense of grittiness because the camera can pick up that it is a physical object, right? So if I move these glasses back and forth, the camera's picking up on that being a physical object. My hand is a physical object. But the moment that you make it digital, like imagine there's a hand reaching in front of my face right now with a spell on it or something. I don't do CGI, so you're not going to get that in my video. But imagine if there was, you would be able to tell immediately that it's CGI because it would look fake compared to me and my real hand. When you start from CGI and you're building everything with CGI, and then you have a human transposed on top of that image, the human stands out. Anything real stands out because the camera is catching the light, the edges, everything that's real about that, and trying to balance it against that CGI background. So Frank Oz's take on things is really good. He was talking about how, for example, when he watched the scene where Palpatine is dueling Yoda in the last Revenge of the Sith, he was like that scene took him out of it. But then he compared that to say Gollum. When Andy Serkis was playing Smeagol, and the Smeagol versus Gollum scene where Smeagol and Gollum are back and forth with each other in front of the pool, and um, you know, that scene, he said that was incredibly believable to him, even though it was CGI, because he said first and foremost, it was a real actor there portraying the character, and then the CGI was transposed over the character, as opposed to the Yoda character fighting Palpatine. That was a 100% digital character, which takes away from the realism. Now, the original, and we're going to talk about two trilogies here. One, of course, the first one I want to talk about really quickly is the Lord of the Rings films, because since we're talking about Rings of Power, we're going to talk about this, but we're also going to talk about Star Wars, which was the king of miniatures and first started using CGI and blending it and et cetera over the years. And we're not talking Disney era. Although Disney is doing some crazy things with Unreal technology right now, which is just phenomenal. Um, we're going to talk about the original trilogies and the prequel trilogies specifically. But let's go to Lord of the Rings. If you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, which I'm assuming most of you have, especially if you've watched the enhanced editions and you have the documentary featurettes, the massive appendices where Peter Jackson went through every level of painstaking detail that was created for those films, everything was done from scratch, basically. They talk about a lot of this stuff, like Shelob, for example, was CGI, but these sets, the rocks, the cave, everything else was actual physical sets. And they talk about here, as an example, when Frodo enters the lair of the giant spider Shelob, most of the lair was a real set. All the bones and cobwebs are physical objects that Frodo can touch, but the spider had to be CGI. Looked really good, by the way. Then we get to the Hobbit films, and we talk about the fact that the Hobbit is often criticized because of its overuse of CGI. Now, there's a great discussion about this that in terms of practical effects in the Lord of the Rings, one of the reasons that the Lord of the Rings is unique in many ways is because Weta built almost everything from scratch for those films. Not just the sets, but we're talking hundreds of sets of armor. I believe it might have even been thousands of sets of armor, but hundreds of sets of armor, hundreds of weapons, hand stitching, hand crafting the chainmail. Um, Everything was detailed. Prosthetics were heavily used for all of the Urukai, at least all the close-up shots. And you had all of these miniatures that were being shot for places like Rivendell and Minas Tirith and Barad-dûr and Orthanc, etc. So when the camera gets up real close to those, it's picking up like that's a real object. And the Star Wars movies did the same thing. They used a lot of miniatures, even in the prequels, when um, we had a lot of, where is it here? For example, there's this video on the sets that were built for example, the arena in Attack of the Clones. This was built into 3 different sets that were miniature sets, and then they spent, I think, a few weeks, if I remember correctly, filming all of the shots that they needed, all the shots that they would need from the different angles for that set. And then they used green screen to put the actors there and transpose them over that real set. And again, when you do that, it adds a level of realism to things because you're picking up the fact that that's a real object. It's an actual set, a miniature set, but it's still a set as opposed to just a fully green screen environment. Going back to this Lord of the Rings practical effects aspect, makeup um, and prosthetics. Then we get to, and I love this here. Compare the effects of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series and how much they differ. The Hobbit uses much more CGI and didn't utilize as many practical effects and makeup. This leads to things like the pale orc Azog, who never looks fully real compared to the orcs and Uruk-hai in the original films, or the horrific scene where Legolas is like jumping up the blocks as they're falling, and it just looks. It's one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in a film before. It's so fake. I hate, as much as I love the overall movies that Peter Jackson did, obviously the original trilogy being my favorite, extended editions only, by the way. I haven't seen theatrical since they came out. And the Hobbit films are lesser in my mind for a lot of different reasons, but one of those is that they just used so much CGI and it was so much more blatantly evident. Now, there's a reason why CGI is used because it's quicker. It's not necessarily cheaper. However, it can be cheaper in some cases because you don't have to build massive sets that then have to be torn down. You also don't have to deal with restrictions on locations, for example, like needing to the natural environment is important, right? And for example, when they were doing the sets for Rohan, they had to work with the local government to make sure that when they built the sets, that they were respecting the natural environment, and that when they took everything down, it had to be exactly like it was before they were there, as if they had never been there. That's all difficult. It adds to extensive shooting delays and all the stuff with weather and all these other things. And if you're on a tight production schedule and you're trying to save money, you don't want to deal with all that crap, you can just throw a green screen up, have all your scenes shot on a green screen, and move on about your business. Which I will never agree with because even if you can't shoot on location, you should be building sets. That's just in my mind. But again, building a set takes time. So from a time saving and cost saving perspective, because time is money, this is why CGI is used, which I just don't fucking get with Amazon's Rings of Power show, because they spent $450 million to build or to create the first season. It's not that much more money to build sets. But here's the other issue, and I don't have the article up in front of me. But there's a really interesting article that I might cover in a different piece, which talks about one of the issues with, like, for example, Wheel of Time, is every place they went on that show, every set looks pristine. Like the Two Rivers is supposed to be this ancient village that looks, that's supposed to have been there for a very long time, and yet in the show it looks like it was just built yesterday. There's no moss, mud, ivy, overgrown trees and roots. And everything's just pristine. And I saw the same thing in some of the shots from the Rings of Power. Like everything looks pristine. And that was one of the things that I didn't like about, say, some of the aspects of the Shannara Chronicles, was because everything was pristinely clean, nothing looked lived in, as opposed to Game of Thrones, where everything looks gritty, muddy, bloody, nasty, gross. Who wants to live there? Everyone looks like they stink. No one's showered in months. It looked realistic. If you have never done so, this is an article from sci-fi.com talking about 10 Star Wars documentaries you should check out after watching The Book of Boba Fett. So, as much as I love what they did with Lord of the Rings and etc., the granddaddy in my mind of everything that we have today is going to be ILM, Industrial Lights and Magic, which was the predecessor to Weta Digital, or Weta and then Weta Digital, was Industrial Lights and Magic, which was formed out of the genesis that was Star Wars: A New Hope. If you have never watched any of these documentaries, you need to do a deep dive, because the things that they did were literal magic. Like, especially during Empire Strikes Back, like some of the stuff they did in the first film, A New Hope, was very rudimentary, but it worked. Like the Death Star shot, the Death Star trench literally being like a series of ping pong tables, and then like the set was built on top of the ping pong tables, and then they, drive alongside the ping pong table with a camera on an arm attached that was going down the trench as it went down. Like that is a very rudimentary, really cool feature. Also looking at like the way they did the perspective filming in the Lord of the Rings films with Peter Jackson, where you've got big actors, and all the actors are normal sized, but they're using shifted perspectives, not CGI, and it looked really good. It still looks good to this day. This chair sucks. Anyway, watch these documentaries if you can. The founding of ILM, etc. It really shows you the progression of the building of these films and the miniature use. Now, I love The Empire Strikes Back in particular. It has so many miniatures, which they would go on to use in Return of the Jedi as well. But one of my favorites is the cargo ship that escapes off of Hoth. There's a sequence when they're all fleeing Hoth and the Imperial fleet's there bombarding the planet, or having the blockade while the land troops are down. The AT-ATs are, AT-ATs, whatever you want to call them. I call them AT-ATs because AT-AT, AT-ST. I don't like to go from AT-AT to AT-ST. It makes no sense to me, so I always just say AT-AT. Get over it. There's a sequence when the ion cannon fires off the planet, and it shoots up and it hits the Star Destroyer, and it paralyzes the Star Destroyer so that this cargo ship can fly by. And there's a sequence in one of these documentaries where the model maker is talking about the weeks of work that went into painstakingly creating this amazing ship that was a cargo ship. And on the top side was the ship, but on the underside were all the cargo containers, which are literally the same type of cargo containers that you would find on a cargo ship sailing the oceans that we have today. But instead of being topside, it's flipped upside down. And so they're hanging from the bottom of the ship as it flies up into space. And the amount of detail that went into putting, hand painting every one of those cargo modules differently and everything else. Now you're only going to see that ship is only, that miniature is only in the shot for a couple of seconds, maybe a few seconds at most, and then it's gone, forever gone, never to be seen again. And he says, on the one hand, he says it's very sad that we spent weeks of work for this thing that's only going to be in this shot for a few seconds. But at the end of the day, if we hadn't spent weeks on that and put all this detail into that model, when that ship had gone by, you never would have gotten that same level of realism and detail that you got. Um, the fact that Jabba the Hutt took multiple people to operate still blows my mind. It really is cool. Matte paintings and all the miniature stuff. Yoda seems like a living person because guess what? He was a puppet and it was a physical object that actors could interact with as opposed to a tennis ball on the end of something. So at the end of the day, I'm a big fan of practical effects, not just because they look better, but also because from an actor's standpoint, it puts you into the scene and it enables you to give a better performance because you're actually interacting with objects and things that are actually there for the most part. So I'm always going to vote in favor of practical effects because the camera captures it, the eye can see it, we know it, we get more immersed in physical worlds, and it drives me nuts when companies cut corners by using primarily CGI. I think CGI is great. Right time, right place, though, everybody. Like it you should always be shooting on location if possible, or building real sets and using miniatures and only using CGI as a backup or filler. But I'm not a production company. What do I know? I'm just a fan. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get more content like this delivered straight to you. Don't forget to check out our Discord if you'd like to. And if you want to support the channel, you can either join as a member or you can head over to our Patreon page and look at all of the things fantastical that are being created in the world, the weave and the void by myself, my brother, and my wife. Links are down there. See everybody next time.